All right. Okay, Giancarlo, you're on the stage. What's up, man?
What's up? I wanted to ask Ryan what he thought. So I've been cold calling through my CRM. I try to do an hour or two a day. So I wonder what you thought about that because I feel like after 2 hours I get a little burnt out. And then post that, like organizing it. Like, what do you suggest with that? Because I find like I'll call and then I'm like kind of zonked, but then like I have all the stuff to organize. So I just thought maybe you had an idea of or your system.
Yeah, great question. Look, so as some of you know, I used to sell cars. Oh, by the way, thanks for the t-shirt. I'm wearing one.
Yeah.
For those who don't know Giancarlo, he is a firefighter and will provide you with some awesome swag that I'm wearing. And Mike's wearing his too. Let's go, dude.
Yeah, yeah.
To answer your question, look, I'm a former car salesman, and what I will tell you is, in short, Giancarlo, the answer is you just got to pick up the phone and make it ring. And if that's you make calls for 15 minutes and then take 45 minutes off, and then the next hour 15 minutes and then 45 minutes off, or you do it where you call from 9 to 5 all day long, or you only call for 2 hours and then you're spent. Doesn't matter. Everybody is different. Your tolerance for a sales type situation is different. Some people love it, like I do. Some people hate it. The way it was described to me in terms of introverts versus extroverts, it's that introverts get their energy when they're chilling and it's quiet and there's not a whole lot going on. But when they're in a social situation, it drains their energy because they're introverts. Whereas with extroverts, it's the opposite. And boy, oh boy, is that true for me. I'm a big time extrovert. What gave that away? And when I go to events like this or, networking events or whatever, like, and I'm out and I'm talking and I'm listening and I'm learning and meeting people, that gives me energy. And so when I go to cold call, as long as people aren't overly rude or ridiculous, like it's generally speaking going and making calls to folks and building a relationship, and it's fun for me. So it's easy for me to be on the phone for a long time. That's not the case for everybody. So all this to say, Giancarlo, to answer your question in a more broad way that'll touch quite literally everybody listening in, when you go to cold call, just remember the most important thing is just picking up the phone. And I'll tell you what Ian used to do because Ian and I went through this. What worked for me back in the day was cold call for an hour. That's going to be, I don't do that anymore because I have a different way of cold calling now, or a different structure. But when I got started, I was like, an hour today is going to be spent cold calling. And as long as I do an hour of cold calling a day for 5 days during the week, that's 5 hours a week. And as long as I do that every single week, it's going to amass hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And that was how I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get this done when I have my energy and my focus and my determination right first thing in the morning because it's the highest value activity, or whenever in the day I thought people were gonna answer their phone. And that's kind of how I hacked my own brain. And for Ian was like, should I do 20 calls? And I was like, you should do whatever. I just gave him the same spiel. And Ian was like, I'm going to do 20 calls. And then he's like, this is the answer. And like a week later, he was like, this was not the answer. I was like, okay, why was it not the answer? And he's like, well, because I found myself rooting for people not to pick up their phone. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, well, that doesn't work then, right? Because like if you're rooting for people not to pick up their phone, what the heck are you doing? And don't even pick up the phone. Like you should be rooting for someone not only to answer, but to be warm to you. Maybe not necessarily, hey, Giancarlo, I'll sell you my park right now, but at least take your call, build rapport, and they'll answer your call next time. Like that's got to be the minimum. And if you're not excited for that to be an outcome, then you have to figure out a way to get yourself excited to pick up the phone. Whether again, and Ian ended up by the way, Ian ended up doing the same thing I did, which is like, all right, you cold call for an hour a day. And that's it. When you're done, you're done. You can go further if you want to. You could have it count as bleeding into tomorrow if you want to. However, you got to mentally hack yourself into getting excited to pick up the phone. That's the right answer. You got to find a way to pick up the phone. But great question.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I'm gonna take you off and ask the next question.
Mike, you muted yourself. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Trent, I assume that you can speak live. I'm gonna bring you to the stage if that's okay. Talk. Hey, Trent, how's it going?
Good. You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Perfect. So I'm operating a portfolio in Kansas and Missouri, and we have we're getting to the point where we need to start making some decisions on vacant lots. And I know that it's there's got to be some kind of formula that you would run to determine, really what the how much you would want to invest in a vacant lot. For example, in several of our markets, to bring in brand new homes and sell them in the 70 to 80,000 range is going to be a real challenge because there's single family homes in the $100,000 range that are available. So without trying to be too pessimistic about our options to sell new homes, is there anything that you guys, or a rule of thumb that you guys participate or practice to kind of determine the max value of what you could invest in a lot?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Trent, and I'm happy to literally share with you my own personal calculus. So I own in big cities, Charlotte, North Carolina, Tampa, Florida, Orlando, Florida, and I own in secondary cities, Tallahassee, Florida, Ocala, Florida, Biloxi, Mississippi, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I own one in the middle of nowhere. Seriously, look this town up. Enfield, North Carolina. Bet you never heard of it. Why? There's nothing there. And from a high level, you're gonna spend 60 to $75,000 for a brand new home. Pretty much so no matter what. Could it be more? Yes. Could it be less? Yes, but that's a reasonable-ish range. And from a high level, you're going to have a return on that from a capital appreciation standpoint that you have to consider. So if you're buying, say, and it's always important to not look at this like a forever hold, because if you look at look at this math problem like it's a forever hold and you have infinite money, the answer is always going to be spend the money to bring in the home. So we have to set some mathematical limits on this. So say it's a 5-year hold. If I buy a $75,000 home for Enfield, North Carolina, which our lot rent right now is $300, and you can, using the 100x rule, assume that $300 means 30,000 an occupied site on an exit, plus or minus. If I go and spend, just round down, say $60,000 on a brand new home and bring it in, and then I go to sell it at that 5-year mark, I'm losing $30,000 at that specific lot, assuming no cash flow. Now let's assume there's some cash flow. Well, is there at least $30,000 worth? Maybe. Enfield's a pretty small town. There's a lot of really cheap rentals there. So I'm competing with not just Enfield, but everything in Halifax County and the surrounding counties. And by the way, Roanoke Rapids isn't too far up the road. Uh, Rocky Mount isn't just 20 minutes south. Battleboro is even closer. Scotland Neck is right around the corner. There's a bunch of options for people beyond just in little old Enfield, North Carolina. Therefore, I better make that $30,000 in cash flow throughout that period. And that, by the way, could be actually selling it for 60, 75,000 bucks, whatever that may be. You've got to make up that cash difference. Otherwise, the math just straight doesn't make sense. And by the way, I know a ton of people who have bought deals in secondary and tertiary markets and infilled brand new homes and got clobbered because they can't sell off the homes for the exact reasons you just described there, Trent. And then they go, well, crap, I can't sell it. Let's rent to own it. Nobody wants that. Why? Because they want the land too. Because of course they would. And I would too. I would want to buy the land too. So then they go, well, crap, why don't we rent the home out? And then they're like, great, but I can only rent it for $800. And people do a ton of damage to these homes. Right now, all of a sudden, it's not worth 75,000 bucks anymore or anywhere close to that. Right. So the math falls apart in tertiary markets. Secondary markets. So we discussed, I mentioned Biloxi, Mississippi, Fayetteville, North Carolina. The problem that I faced there with bringing in new homes is those markets are heavily renters markets. So not a big deal if I can get 1,200, 1,500 bucks a month per home if lot rent's low. So that could work. Again, using that same example before, let's say it's 30,000 occupied sites, 60,000 all in, you got to make up 30,000 bucks in 5 years. If you have a strong rent, and that makes up for, apologies if you hear kids screaming in the background, Kyle. I also have two kids who cannot read the room, despite two locked doors.
We
Sorry,
can't hear it
everybody.
though. It's amazing every time. This Yeti microphone's fantastic.
I love this Yeti microphone because my son is just love him so much, but he is, yeah. Well, it's snowing outside in North Carolina right now, so I kind of don't blame him. Doesn't snows here maybe once a year. Anyways, you look at something like a Fayetteville or an Ocala or a Tallahassee, and all of a sudden, if you can make that difference up between what you bought the home for, what you're going to sell that lot for in year 5, and you know the rent proceeds or the sale proceeds if you sell it, like as long as that makes up that delta, you're good. That's a question of in a secondary market, do you have the confidence that you can bridge that gap? By the way, I know people in secondary markets who have done this and got their face kicked in. The last bit is in a primary market. Now, I'll tell you why I really like this in Raleigh, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia. Big market, millions of people. Because if you look at Charlotte, Atlanta, Tampa, it ain't nothing going for under 100,000 a site occupied. So if I'm going to spend $75,000 and literally do nothing but slam somebody in the day before I close, I just made $25,000. Is my basis on that home in that lot is 75,000. I just sold it for 100. So in primary markets where the delta is high, it almost doesn't matter if you cash flow during that 5-year hold or not because you have intrinsic value of 25,000 bucks. It starts to be a math problem in a secondary market, and in a tertiary market, like, dude, you better really know that market or be willing to grind it out for a long time. Otherwise, you're literally going to lose money. And by the way, you try this in scale, you may go bankrupt. And I know several outfits who have done that. Trent, outstanding question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick because I'm the spreadsheet guy. Let me just share my screen so you guys can see. Basically, what Ryan's saying here in terms of like a spreadsheet is that different markets will dictate a different cap rate based on the NOI that you're able to achieve from that specific investment, right? So, you know, if we take a look at, let me just zoom in here so you guys can see. If we take a look at like lot rent of $500 and we're assuming, you know, a 30% expense ratio on that lot rent, then your NOI for that lot specifically is going to be $350 on a monthly basis. You annualize that to about $4,200 per year, and then you take the capitalized value, you actually apply a cap rate to this, and what you'll get is the capitalized value at an 8% cap rate is $52,000, right? So you can sell this lot for $52,000 is effectively what this is saying at an 8 cap. You know, that changes when you go to a more tertiary market where people are acquiring higher cap rates for the same property. So you need to kind of like understand the dynamics, like as Ryan's saying, if you're in a tertiary market, that cap rate's going to increase and the capitalized value of that lot is going to be less than it would be in a primary market where maybe you can achieve a 7% cap rate. Now all of a sudden you can sell this thing at $60,000, right? So that's really the math behind it as well. Like as you move between tertiary and primary markets, cap rates will rise and fall, as Ryan was kind of mentioning, and this will dictate the sales value of that lot because of the NOI it generates. So if you're spending $100,000 to bring that lot in, right, then you're actually losing $40,000 if you don't take into account the difference, or if you don't take into account the cash flow you're also achieving over the life of your hold. So this is like a quick kind of way to math it out as well, that is more academic in nature, but it tends to kind of track cap rates and whether or not, you can achieve higher rents. There might be upside here in the lot rent, it could be $700 and then all of a sudden this math changes. So, these are the types of exercises we like to do in order to understand the value of a specific lot in a specific market.
Trent, if you're doing the math and it's consistently having you lose money, you may not be doing the math wrong. It may just be that the math doesn't make sense, at least for new homes. Don't forget, you always bring in a used home and get your basis low, like 30,000 bucks. I've consistently brought stuff in for, bought it for 5 to 10, moved it for 5, set it up for another 10, rehab, and all in I'm at 30,000 bucks. And then, I'm in markets where they'll trade for 60,000 a site, the mobile home park. So like all of a sudden I spent 30,000 bucks. I sell it one day for 60,000 and occupied. I've made a ton of money and I've cash flowed along the way. But again, just because the math doesn't seem like it's making make sense to you and you see other people doing it doesn't mean they're making money doing it. In fact, a lot of people are losing a lot of money by bringing in new homes. Trent, did you have a follow-up question with that?
No, thank you guys. That's a terrific answer, and I really do appreciate it. I think the challenge that we face in the Midwest, the used market is so dry. I mean, and I'm sure it is just about everywhere because of these math problems that people are facing. So if you, I mean, obviously it's just a longer, slower play to to shop and find occasional used homes that you can pick up. If you have, I mean, are you just focusing on efficiency and lowering the operating expense at that point to just maximize the value of the community as it is?
Look, that brings up a great follow-up point to what you just asked right there, which your train of thought is perfect because this is more or less what I would have said had you not had a follow-up question, Trent, which is that you have to remember where you're at in your hold. So even if you want to keep this until you're dead and pass it on to your kids, this meaning the mobile home park, you still really should look at it and say 2 to 5 year chunks. And depending where you're at in that chunk, you have to remember, let's say you have a mobile home park that nets you after mortgage and everything $100,000 a year. And like this is a real situation I'm going through today is I had 2 people move homes out. It happens when you raise rent. Sometimes people leave and it is capitalism at work. If I'm too high on my price, people are going to leave and that's okay. Um, the question is that property makes me about 100 grand a year, me and my investors. I'm not the only one involved there. Um, it'll cost me $30,000 per home. And you go, hey, I'm going to sell this asset for 100,000 a site one day, bring in a home for 30,000 bucks, and I'm going to make $70,000 per home. Plus, I'm going to cash flow it along the way. No brainer, right? Well, wrong. Here's why. If I bring in a home for $30,000 and I do, say, a rent to own for $1,000 a month, um, that would be what, $12,000 a year. So in 3 years, that's $36,000 plus a down payment, let's say $2,000. So in 3 years, that's 38,000. And I spent 30,000 bucks to get 38,000 in 3 years, which sounds great. But don't forget, I'm doing this times two. So it's really $60,000 out of my pocket. And again, I'm not getting my money back until year two and change, 2.5 to 3 years. So where I would have had $100,000 to spit out in, say, year zero or whatever year you're in your hold, I now have 40,000 to spit out because we spent 60,000 in filling 2 homes. And so while you're like, yeah, but I'm making 70,000 bucks per home because we're going to sell it for 100,000 a site one day, and we're going to cash flow it along the way and have all of our money back in 2.5 to 3 years. Great. I'm still only making $40,000 this year. And why is that relevant? Well, that's relevant because if you're doing this in scale, let's say you have every time you raise the rent because you're close to top of market, you end up losing a home or two, and you end up doing this experiment on average twice a year. You have two people remove homes per year, and you replace two homes per year. Again, just saying in a vacuum. Not saying this happens to me. I could probably count on two hands the number of times I've had people rip homes from my communities. But this is a great academic, hypothetical, theoretical situation to talk through. All of a sudden, your $100,000 a year cash flowing property is now a $40,000 a year cash flowing property. Now, fine, maybe you make $70,000 a site at the end of that hold when you go to sell or refinance it. But what if you need that money to survive, right? What if you quit your job and you now make $100,000 a year owning this mobile home park? And the lot rent, just to make it clean and simple, say the lot rent's $500. So you lost two lots, and two lots is $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, $60,000 over 5 years. Or you pay, so in other words, your opportunity cost is there is $60,000 in lot rent, or you spend $60,000 infilling today. Like, you really have to ask that question of, all right, if you're going to make 88,000 instead of 100,000 because you have two lot rents not paying for that entire year, but you have $88,000 of cash flow or $40,000 of cash flow, what do I do? And the answer is going to be different for everybody. I am a capital appreciation guy. I don't care about cash flow anymore. I don't live a lavish lifestyle. I don't need anything. Like my joy comes from helping others. That's payment enough for me. So I am looking to multiply my capital because I want to go and do more and help more. When I was starting, I had the opposite issue. I almost didn't care what my net worth was because the way to get full time in mobile home parks and stay full time in mobile home parks was cash flow. Most of us listening in on this call are somewhere in between the two. You want a little bit of cash flow and a little bit of capital appreciation. Then it goes down to, are you owning these mobile home parks yourself? Because if this is your full time job, you may not be able to afford, a $60,000 hit to your cash flow, even though it's an investment, right? But let's say you raise the money here and you have an 8% preferred return on the the asset here. Like, are you okay not paying the pref while you infill homes? What if you have to do this every year? What if all of a sudden you're never paying the pref and you're letting it accrue over years and years and years, right? So, Trent, that was a fantastic question and fantastic follow-up question. I hope my answer really covered a whole variety of different questions and situations. But for everybody else listening in, I think it's incredibly important to remember that everybody has a different strategy, that Trent's math may be different than Giancarlo's math because Giancarlo's in a completely different situation than Trent. And I don't just mean different cities and different markets. I also mean different investors, right? Like tech investors, they almost only care about cash flow. So I have some tech investors and they just ask me like, when's the pref money coming in? That's all I care about, right? My real estate investors who are bona fide real estate folks, they're like, I want to give you $1 and I want to get back 2 or 3. I don't care if the cash flows along the way. Those are two extremes, but you have to attack every situation that way. From who am I partnered with? What do I want out of this situation? What's more important to me, the capital appreciation or the cash flow? And all of that goes into your decision. And one more time, and I have to say this again, it bears repeating. You can do this math and it be wrong, and that's okay. Infilling is not always the answer. Fantastic question. Thank you again, Trent.
So Robbie currently is driving. He says there's a lot of road noise, so I will read his question out loud for him. He says, here's my question. What is a good industry stat for turning around a tenant? Better way to ask, how long should I hold my team accountable to have a home re-rented after a tenant leaves, including dealing with a quick punch list of maintenance and cleanup?
Look, very relevant question for underwriting, for operation, for strategy, for everything. Robbie, I own in Tallahassee, Florida. I just did a huge analysis of my last 3 years of performance there. And what I found in Tallahassee, Florida is that our stick rate is approximately 50%. I think it came out to like 48%, where going back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, only half the people remained. And obviously, the closer to today, so in other words, the younger, the newer the resident, the higher the stick rate. But in time, it dramatically falls off. Was it 2022? I have some 2021 data, but it's not relevant. My 2020, early 2022 data, because as of this recording, we're early 2025. What the data showed, Robbie, was that it probably in Tallahassee is going to stabilize around 33%, meaning for everybody we lease up, we're only keeping 1 out of 3 people. What that means is I'm going to have to sell a vacant home, because we're trying to our best to sell in that market. I'm going to have to sell a home an extra 2 times. So if I sell 3 homes, I'm getting 2 of them back. And now I have to sell 2 homes again. So in other words, I'm selling 3 homes 5 times. Oh, and don't forget, one of those 2 homes will likely default as well. Or not default, but just turnover, either through default or cash for keys or natural attrition or whatever. In other words, the stick rate is low. And what that means is I'm going to have to marry myself to good rehab teams and good marketing and good salesmanship. And by the way, we do very well in Tallahassee. I love that marketplace. You just have to know what that market is, because we ain't the iPhone. We're not inventing things that people don't know they want yet. It's a very mature space. And therefore, we can't tell the market what it wants. We have to go and try to understand what the market is and then give it what it wants. Now, in terms of how quickly can you lease something up? Because I think that's a relevant next question is like, should I go and harass my team if they're not leasing stuff up fast enough? Look, that is an incredibly highly dependent question on what city you're in. What does the culture like in that city? Tallahassee is a very renter heavy market. I have offered homes for sale there. I get crickets. I offer a home for rent there. The line's out the door. I have a great marketing team in Tallahassee. But guess what? It almost doesn't matter, because it's a renter city and they love rentals. That's just who they are. And that's okay, because I know that and I can plan for it. Charlotte, North Carolina, totally different story. We sell homes all day long and we can sell them fast. If I haven't sold a home within 30 days, something's wrong. And don't forget, too, 2 bedrooms sell slower than 3 bedrooms for obvious reasons. You know, you can put a single dude in his 20s with no girlfriend or no boyfriend or no whatever he's into a 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 5 bedroom, don't matter. Good luck cramming a family of 8 into a 2 bedroom. Ain't happening, right? Unless they're truly desperate. What does that mean? That means there's a bigger market for more bedrooms and more space. That is going to dictate how fast you can sell things. So, you know, it depends. It depends on a lot. Depends on what your marketing offering is, where you're at in your price point, right? Like you could have a line out the door, but be charging too much so no one ever signs up. But the turn in terms of how long it's going to take you to go from vacant unit to rehabbed to marketed to sold to someone moves in and pays, will highly, highly, highly depend on your city, on your location within that city, on the community, on how big the unit is, how many rooms it has. So Robbie, I know your follow-up question is probably going to be like, well, what's a rule of thumb? And like, the reality is, dude, I don't have one for you. The reality is, for you and everybody listening in, it is your responsibility to go out and try to understand the markets that you're in, and then try to find a reasonable turn time. And then when you have enough data, hopefully you don't have to wait 3 years to get the kind of data I have now in Tallahassee, but you wait potentially years to get good data. Then you can hold your team a little bit more accountable, right? Guys, what's taking the rehab so long here? We should have been done a week ago. Guys, why haven't we leased this up? What's going on? Is it that people don't have their tax money yet? Or is it that, are we at this point in the seasonality with lease up? Are we here, that, and the other place, right? The more data you have, Robbie, the more you'll be able to quantify that. And by the way, you're going to want to quantify that. So there is an opportunity cost to a home sitting vacant. And if you can understand how much that's going to cost you, $1,000, 2,000, but whatever it's going to cost you, then you can look for ways to shorten that. inventory hold, if you will, opportunity cost, that if you will, and try to shorten that as much as humanly possible. But again, it all comes down to this. You have to understand your marketplace. You have to give them what they want, and you have to track data and look at that data and then hold your team accountable accordingly. And just, be careful of the anecdote. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, dude, we are humans and we think in stories. We memorize in stories. Song is story, for crying out loud. Like, we are a species that loves stories. You just have to remember that data is more important than stories, almost always. Because when we don't have data, we tell ourselves stories. And then we believe these stories with no data backing it up. And then we make big boy decisions and big girl decisions off literally stories we've told ourselves. So just remember, if you go and harass your team, you're like, you guys, like, what are you, you're going too slow, or you're going to this, you're going to that, and you have no data, you could be totally wrong. You'd be alienating great people. Or the flip of that, maybe they're actually awful, right? But the more you can quantify that, like they say, what gets measured gets managed. That's how you have to look at it. But great question.
I'll follow up quickly with some quick data from my private equity shop before I left. If you're leasing up a property from a vacant pad and filling it, we targeted about 3 months from the time we targeted that pad to be filled to the time it was leased up and off our plate. In terms of like existing inventory turnover, when someone leaves, we tried to get it to at a minimum or at a maximum a month. It sometimes went to a month and a half. What Ryan said is extremely important. It's highly market dependent because you could have a longer eviction process in certain cases. You could have you could have less demand in that market. One of the biggest things that could hold you up is not having SOPs in place to, in an efficient way, have your staff do the things that they need to do over and over again in a repetitive process. You might not have the right documentation. So you might be leaning on them to do something quickly, but you haven't set up the proper processes in order for them to actually do that in the right order and as quickly as they did the previous time. Because just like anything else, people forget how to do things. Like if you ask me how to do a specific task and I haven't done it in 6 months and there's no documentation on that task, it's going to take me a hell of a lot longer to refigure it out the second time around and the third time around. So these are important aspects of that. That's why it's important to be documenting your processes and have those contacts in place, those vendors you're going to call immediately when you find out those people are going to leave, and then start your marketing process to get that home leased up again right afterwards. Have an estimate about when it's going to be done. This is, something you're going to have to build in your SOPs and that your staff is going to have to be trained on in order to best achieve those goals. So highly market dependent. Based on regulations in the market, based on your marketing funnels, and based on your actual ability to execute the SOPs and your staff's ability to execute those SOPs. So thank you, Robbie, for that question. Okay, so Donna is next. Let me move her to. There you go, Donna. You want to ask your question live?
Dana, you're on mute.
Oh,
There you go.
got it. This is Bob, Donna's husband. She's here as well.
Hello.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
How are you?
Good, great. I've been going through your materials and listening to your podcast. I've gotten a lot out of it.
Thank you.
We are getting close to taking down our first park, and we're trying to price it right now. Using your estimator, I came up with about a 50% mark to market, which I thought was a little optimistic. When I did the comps, it came out to maybe 40 at most, a 40% mark to market. Which numbers should I be more concerned with?
Fantastic question, Bob. Donna. I don't know who to give credit to, Donna or Bob. I'm going to assume Donna. If my wife was on the call, she'd be like me. So, look, that's a great question, and I'm really glad you brought it up, and I'm going to tell you why. So I have two wonderfully useless degrees in statistics, at least useless, like professionally speaking. I use statistics basically every day, so I love statistics. There's a beautiful book called How to Lie with Statistics. And there's a wonderful, I believe it is a Mark Twain quote where he says, "There's lies, damn lies in statistics." There is a lot of reason to be very hesitant to use something like the 50% rule off the HUD website. And that reason is, I brought up Fayetteville, North Carolina earlier. I'm going to use it again. Fayetteville is a really interesting test case because Fayetteville kind of has two tiers of people. They have people who are military related because Fayetteville with Fort Liberty slash Fort Bragg, whatever you want to call it, have people who just naturally come to the city with pretty high salaries, who are looking in the call it $1,000 to $1,500 rental range, and there's a lot of them. But Fayetteville is an interesting place because you have the Cape Fear Medical System, you have Methodist, you have Fayetteville State University. So you got two big universities. You know, Fort Bragg has a ton of ancillary companies that come along with it, not just the base. And, you know, ton of medical jobs, ton of government jobs. There's a lot going on in Fayetteville, but it's still, you know, I think the MSA just eclipsed 500,000 people, and the town is like over 200,000 people. It's still a secondary market, and it's not as robust in the middle tier, meaning you have a bunch of folks who have plenty of money, but then you have a bunch of folks who don't have any money who are looking for like $600 rentals. And you really don't have people looking for $600 to $1,000 rentals. Like that just doesn't really happen. What that means is if you have a really nice mobile home park in Fayetteville, like I have several, I am not competing with other mobile home parks. I am competing with bona fide apartment complexes, like really, really nice ones. And although we do fine in Fayetteville, I love that place. We've got a good team in place. Uh, my competition is insane. And I can't just lower the price and try to undercut everybody with $900 rentals because the market is just not as robust. So, in other words, when you go to HUD's website for Fayetteville, you'll see the average rental is high. It's like $1,200, $1,300, $1,400. What that doesn't tell you is that half of that isn't going to want to pay anywhere close to $1,400, and the other half is more than happy to pay $1,400, but they are competing against your mobile home park against like really nice apartment complexes and single family home rentals.
Okay.
That is kind of the lie that can be told. And lie is a strong word. But that breaks down even further the further tertiary you go. Because when you're in, you know, Phoenix, Arizona, and there's millions and millions and millions of people there, the data set HUD uses is unbelievably massive. When you're looking at, I mentioned Enfield, North Carolina earlier, like there's just not enough data for HUD to gather. So they have to start going to surrounding cities to compile enough to be statistically significant. So the danger that you could use with this HUD method that Michael and I, you know, preach is that the data itself may be wrong. And it's not that HUD is wrong, it's that we are interpreting the data incorrectly because we're looking at one number instead of an entire population or an entire data set, if you will. So the obvious question is, well, what's the workaround to that? You know, what should I look at? And the whole reason why Michael and I say, hey, you should use this, you know, half of the two bedroom on the HUD is because generally speaking, that has been more accurate than calling other mobile home parks. When you look at something like Uber and their dynamic pricing, or baseball games for crying out loud, like baseball games, speaking statistics, it's nuts what they do for baseball games now. You have like the pitching matchup goes into this huge multivariate regression analysis, the relevancy of the game, when the game is being played, what the weather forecast is. They have like all of these variables in just an unlimited feeling of data that they have to go and build these statistical models from. Oh, and by the way, what I'm describing was they did like 20 years ago. So it's even better now. And they know with a mountain of data and a mountain of really smart people with just phenomenal machines how to perfectly price a baseball ticket, even when you buy the baseball ticket. Um, Meanwhile, I'm going to call Billy Bob's trailer park down the road. He's going to lick his thumb, put it up the air, and be like, yeah, $300 feels right. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just less inclined to believe what the trailer park down the road is charging. So while that's, kind of a relevant data point, like it really isn't. The best thing you can do, Bob, Donna, is to throw up a test ad, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, wherever, and just see what happens. And if you get a lot of responses, you might be too low on your rent. If you
Okay.
get next to no responses and you're too high on your rent, the best way to test the market is to have a home in your mobile home park ready to sell and throw it up online and see who shows up or who doesn't. Now, it's going to depend because in tertiary markets, even the cheapest deal of the century option is still only going to get maybe a call to 3 calls a day if you're lucky. In terms of like Facebook engagements and hits, you might get 10 in a week. Secondary markets usually get 15, 20, all the way up to 30 or 40. And then primary markets, you're going to get 50 plus hits a day. I mean, it's insane. And when we were in Atlanta, Georgia, when we were in Tampa, Florida, like it's insane how many hits we get a day. Um, so in other words, your response rate is gonna, just because it's slow if you're in the middle of nowhere, that doesn't mean you're wrong on your lot rent. So all this to say, you really need to question the data you're looking at. You really ideally have to have something for sale. But if you have something under contract, which congratulations, by the way, on hopefully your first mobile home park ever, you two.
Thanks.
I work with my wife too, by the way. We're a husband and wife team, so I love to hear that. What I will say is when you're paying for upside, because you have to. I hate to say it, you have to. Um, it's funny. I literally have in my inbox right now an email from a broker asking if I want to make an offer on a mobile home park I've already offered on. How many times do you think he has email? I'm gonna have to respond to this guy like, dude, I'm sorry, like another broker beat you to the punch, and I've already got an offer in with another broker, right? And so
Yeah.
he's got a list of 20 people he's sent the exact same email to. So it's on. And by the way, that email is about a mom and pop mobile home park,
Mhm.
right? So what has happened in our asset class, everybody, is brokers have come in. So where it used to be, you could just cold call because no brokers wanted to touch this asset class for a multitude of reasons. And you could just cold call and basically be your own broker. That's over. That's gone. I mean, there's unbelievable amount of brokers in this asset class relative to when I got started 10 years ago. And they've called everyone. Even if you own like 3 sites, they've called it, right? And then they've emailed everybody they know as a mobile home park buyer. And they create these little pockets of bidding wars. So you have no choice but to pay up for this stuff.
Right.
So, Bob, Donna, I know you want a more specific answer out of me. It's just there's so many factors involved um, that like I'm happy to get a little bit more specific. I don't want y'all to, in a public forum recorded with other people who are going to watch this at some point, give away a deal that I don't want you to have competition on this deal now, but you're willing to tell me a little bit more, we can get a little bit more granular with it.
Actually, your answer was good, and it made sense about the HUD because it is a tertiary market in a very large county, so I can see where the numbers are skewed.
Yep.
That answer actually was very sufficient for me. I appreciate that.
Look, I'm very glad you brought that up. By the way, Michael and I have a mentee right now who was looking at a deal in Iredell County, North Carolina, which includes the Lake Norman area of Charlotte, North Carolina, but it also includes Statesville, North Carolina, which sits on I-40, the intersection of 77 and 40. I'm a Charlotte guy, went to high school here, grew up here. I will tell you, I have never had a need to go to Statesville. It is out there. Like, I don't think I think other than to like get gas, I think I went to Statesville one time, and it was because my cousin was performing. Long story, but it's not Charlotte, but it shares a major suburb of Charlotte. And when I say major, I mean like the football players live there. Like Christian McCaffrey bought a house there. A bunch of NASCAR drivers own in around Lake Norman. And
Mhm.
so you have like the Cornelius, Davidson, Mooresville area, Lowe's corporates there, where you have like insane money driving rental prices up way high because you have like lakefront property, which is insanely expensive. Then you have Statesville, and then you have where the mobile home park was, which was like northwest Iredell County, where it was like it wasn't even in Statesville. It was like a drive to Statesville. And so what I advised our mentees to do is like, I think neighboring county was, I'm going to forget what neighboring county, Hayward County, I think was the neighboring county. Anderson County, I don't remember. I was like, no, get the neighboring counties data because this is like a couple miles from the border. And
Right.
sure enough, that data was like a third of what Iredell County was for obvious reasons. Because now you're talking bona fide middle of nowhere data versus data that's heavily skewed by like NASCAR drivers, right? So
Right.
even when you're in a populated area, um, it can be unbelievably skewed. So yeah, great question, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next up, we have Rob, who asks, can you actually, let me bring Rob to the front. Rob, you have two participants in here. I don't know which one you want to speak with, but I let you both to the stage here. Go ahead. Rob, you might be muted. There you go.
Unmuted, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Right on. What's up, guys? Yeah, I was just
Hey.
curious about the state of the market more. That's just like awesome to hear. Brokers have taken over and it's just different. You can't just cold call, but you probably can. I'm just like, man, maybe tell us more. I'm hungry for that information. I'm looking for my first park. So
Yes, this is a fantastic question. I'm happy to spend time talking about this because when I started 10 years ago, a cold call was a novelty. It was great. You'd call people and they'd be like, "You want to buy my trailer park? What's wrong with you?" Now people think they sit on solid gold. And the really frustrating part too about now is not only do you have all these brokers, but all the mom and pops are largely gone. And the ones that are left have been called 80 million times. So like, I mean, they don't want to talk to you. Like I don't answer. I can't answer calls. I probably get about 5 calls a day at a minimum from numbers I don't have saved in my phone. And like I tell folks this, like, dude, if you call me and I don't know you're calling me, I am not going to answer unless you are saved in my phone. Like, I'm just not. I'm sorry, but there's too many scams out there. There's too much just, extended car warranty people, salespeople. Like, text me, identify yourself. Like, if you're saved in my phone, different story. I still may not answer you anyway. Like, texting is a lot more efficient and I got stuff going on, right? So, like, that being said, it's not changed. There's a lot of mom and pops out there who are hanging on for dear life. And there's a lot of mom and pops out there who just, they get called all the time and they're just yearning for conversation and relationships. And you will clean up if you are different. So Giancarlo, who's on this call earlier, he asked the first question. He is really good at building relationships. He's a very charismatic and likable guy. And guarantee you, he will do well even today with a bunch of other brokers because there still exists and probably always will exist, Rob, a market of people who just don't want to pay a broker. They don't want you to pay a broker either. They just don't want brokers involved because a lot of times brokers can just quite literally call one person, call another person, connect them, and get a fee, an insane fee, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for next to no work. Now, for those easy examples, there are a ton of other examples where brokers work their butts off and don't get paid a penny or get snaked, right? And so, like brokers, they are it's not a bad thing but there's plenty of people who think they're bad things and there's plenty of phone calls that you can make. I would just say this: if you're going to cold call, you got to be different, right? You don't have to be super charismatic and likable like Giancarlo, but like dude, you can't be boring. You have to give people a reason to talk to you on the phone. Otherwise, they're just not gonna. They're gonna save your number and then block your number and never answer your call again. Um, State of the market. Look, when I got started 10 years ago, there were people left and right complaining about how this industry was dead and it was over. Oh, it's over. Oh, these people are, they're running up the prices. There's new regulations. There's new this and like, oh, it's over and, cry me a river. Um, the reality is I should have bought every single mobile home park that was available because it turned out they were unbelievably underpriced for a multitude of different reasons. Lending was not interested in mobile home parks until they decided they were, and private equity was not overly thrilled with mobile home parks until one day they decided they would. They were interested. And then COVID happened and it made everything more expensive. And we're still feeling the effects of that because everything is going up in price every day, despite what the government tells us. And I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican, inflation is up. And it has been up more than I think we are being told. Remember about that whole thing about how to lie with statistics. Uh, and as a result, lot rents a multiple of what it used to be, and therefore these properties are a multiple more of what they used to be. And that's okay. You can still make money. I got an email from my friend Jonathan. Jonathan sent me an email literally this morning saying, Ryan, I am exiting the mobile home park business after all of these years. And I sent him a super warm message in return because I think the world of that guy. And he responded in kind. I hope we keep in touch forever because he is leaving the asset class completely. And let me just read you the message because I think it answers a couple of things right now. He said, here, I'll read this. I appreciate you thinking of me, Ryan. I had pinged him about a portfolio for sale, and he said, "Yep, that's mine. I wanted to share it with you that I'm stepping away from the mobile home park space. As we discussed years ago, we anticipated this industry becoming institutionalized, and that time has arrived. Given the current landscape, I no longer see room for growth in this sector," which I think, Rob, is more or less what your concern is there. It's now dominated by major players like yourself and private equity firms. Hey, don't you put that evil on me. But you're right. It's private equity shops and syndicators and consolidators like myself. I've shifted my focus to acquiring and developing flex space warehouses and retail strip centers. Although the mobile home park space has been a great run, now it's time to pivot and explore more significant opportunities. Wishing you continued success. I appreciate you keeping in touch. My response to that is directly relevant to your question, Rob. I said, Jonathan, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and watching you succeed. It pains me to admit that you're 100% right. Mobile home parks have changed, and good on you for being honest with yourself and the incoming changes. This new landscape isn't for everyone. That shows how much character you have, Jonathan, to not only realize that, but not let ego or anything else prevent you from making the correct decision for you and yourself. You will be missed, my friend. Keep in touch. I'm here to help. And he said a long, lovely message back. Love that guy to death. The reality is, mobile home parks is different than it was when I got started 10 years ago. It is different than pre-COVID 5 years ago. It will be different in 5 years. Maybe not as dramatically different, but the reality is it's going to be different. And a lot of the hype about mobile home parks, it's beyond dead. Like it was dead when I got started 10 years ago. Like this hype story, like, oh yeah, it's passive income. You come in, make all this money, you don't have to do any work. Like it was wrong 10 years ago when I got started, but I still fell in love with it. I still found a way to do well and help people along the way. Rob, it's different now. Mom and pops are largely gone. But guess what? You know what happened? A bunch of lifestyle entrepreneurs went and bought this lie that mobile home parks were easy and lucrative. Um, they fell in love with the idea of things like infilling homes, even though the math didn't make sense. And they got killed. They got crushed. They overpromised. They underdelivered. And They are going to exit the space. That is the next wave. The next wave is all of these lifestyle entrepreneurs, syndicators, people who had no business raising money, who somehow did, are going to fail. And there's no reason why you and everybody else listening, myself included, can't go up and save these assets. Now, are we going to buy something for $20,000 a site and it'd be worth $100,000 a site in 18 months? No, that's gone. That will probably never happen again. But that does not mean that you can't do fabulously well, financially speaking. You can't do fabulously well for your investors, for your residents, for your local community, for everything. I just raised $16.1 million to go and buy more mobile home parks. We fully closed that loan in June. I've already placed over 10 million of that. I only have 6 million left to place. So I'm finding deals. They're out there. Am I overpaying for them? I don't think so, because I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was like, dude, how did you beat me to this deal? I offered more than you, right? So I'm not even the highest bidder on these deals, right? So what I would say about the state of the industry, Rob, is like, this makes MHP IRL, my original podcast, even more relevant to this day, because the hype story about mobile home parks is so far beyond dead that it's rotted and there's almost no evidence of it left. It's dead and gone. Mobile home parks in real life paints a much more accurate picture of what the heck is going on in this asset class. But even then, it's old. Even then, it's old. Good news is Mike and I have a new podcast, but even then, it's old. And the reality is, it's going to change again. And you have to ask yourself, do you love serving these people who live in these communities? And if your answer is yes, like me, then you have to find your way in. And I promise you that there's a way in. Now, is it going to be, all sunshine and rainbows and you're going to make millions and billions of dollars? Probably not. But if your heart is in it and your heart is in the right place, my friend, I'm here. Michael's here. A ton of people listening in right now are here to help you. Like, we got you. Great question, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. And I'll just close that by saying that our mentees, the ones who are in our group program, and the ones who are in our 1v1, it seems like everyone is about to put a deal under contract. There are so many deals out there. I can't even count the number of LOIs I've seen our mentees send over the course of the last 2 months. Something's in the air right now. Deal activity is picking up again, like we haven't seen before. Maybe it's just the market climate due to the change in administration, which we'll talk more about tomorrow on the call with Thomas Castelli, who is a tax strategist. But ultimately, guys, like, there's a lot of potential deal opportunity out there. So don't be persuaded that that's, the dream is dead. It's not at all. We're finding deals at great prices, utilizing really creative deal structures, and also utilizing all the old methods that Ryan used in cold calling. Giancarlo is just about to put a deal under contract, 93 sites, or is it 89 sites, I believe, with 4 sites of upside in Pennsylvania, and the reason he was able to do that is because he cold called for the last 2 years, and this was a contact he made 2 years ago. So this is incredibly important to understand. Like, there's a lot of opportunity that still exists out there. While the 10x multiple on mobile home parks that happened in 2015 doesn't exist anymore in most places, you can still find deals like that. By the way, I'm about to close on one. There are many other opportunities to make significant returns, 20+% returns, 20+% cash on cash returns in this asset type, by cold calling, by using creative deal structures, and by going after broker deals that nobody else wants for whatever reason. It's too tertiary. There's well and septic, and they don't want to deal with that, right? Like, the more problems you're able to solve in this industry, whether it's regulatory or operational, wherever the case may be, the more deals are going to appear to you in your market. So just be aware of that. Don't get down on yourself like, oh, I can't find any deals. Trust me, there's so many out there, and we're seeing that in real time with our mentees. So just want to add that there at the end. There's a lot of optimism in this space still, and Ryan and I are extremely optimistic about the future. So now we have one last question that we'll answer. We're about to go over a bit, and I want to be cognizant of Ryan's time. He has a family at home, 2 young kids, and he wants to obviously have dinner with them. So we'll answer Trent's, and then we'll close. So Trent, I'm going to bring you to the.
Well, let me just read it so we could be a little more efficient. You can tell Michael
Sure.
doesn't have kids because he says Ryan wants to spend time with them. And
Sorry,
not that I
sorry.
don't want to, it's that I don't have a choice. So Ryan has to because he's obligated. But no, I love my kids very much. Rob, thank you for that question, and I'm glad to see Vietnam is, you're seeing the same thing I am right there. Uh, Trying to delete the term Vietnam, by the way, at least while I own there. But no, I actually really love the city. Trent asks, when you're in a market um, that buyers are forced to pay for upside, which may be most markets, unfortunately, what's the argument to make it is worth paying for it? So, by the way, everybody, I just saw another question come in. Apologies. Definitely email us. Happy to answer questions after the fact, but this has got to be the last question for today. Is it scarcity of the asset just because everyone else is doesn't jive with my logic? Seems in line with the idea that if the math isn't penciling, it doesn't mean the math is wrong. What am I missing? Trent, fantastic question, and this is a great one to end on, and I'll tell you why. Because the reason why I say in my podcast and why you've heard me publicly and today say overpay, 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 it's not because I think you ought to actually overpay. It's because I'm trying to help you subtly, subconsciously delete this idea of overpaying, getting a fair deal. Your human psychology as a buyer is going to try to trick you into thinking if it's not a great deal, you don't want to buy it. Or if it's air quotes overpriced, you don't want to buy it. And the best way I can explain this is just like I did on my podcast, where I said, what if you could have bought Amazon stock at IPO for $50 a share more than it went IPO? In the moment, you'd be like, this is a really stupid deal. Like, really dumb. But oh my gosh, I think we all would do that in a second, right? Like, imagine if you could buy Bitcoin when it came out for $1,000 a coin more than it was trading at. Like, would you do that? Heck yeah. And you'd be unbelievably wealthy right now if you had a lot of money you dumped into it, right? So, in other words, when you look at how Warren Buffett describes it, Warren Buffett says, in so many words, I'm not looking for, mediocre to not so great businesses at great prices. Like, I'm looking to pay fair prices for great businesses. That's the mindset. That's what I'm trying to drill into everybody. It's not that you're air quotes overpaying. So Michael and I on group today, we just quite literally pulled up a basic supply demand curve. And when you look at a basic supply demand curve, you have supply, which is how many units you have available to sell, and demand, which are how many people are willing to show up and buy it. And the more people there are, or sorry, the higher priced, the people willing to pay a higher price are just a smaller population. Well, as you go up that group, there are fewer people willing to pay a higher price, and in some cases, they're willing to pay double or more than double what people at kind of the bottom or the right of that curve are willing to pay. Well, then remember that in real estate, there is only the Q equals one, quantity equals one. There is one piece of dirt right here. So in other words, there is likely one person who is the one person in the entire United States of America or the world who is willing to be that top bidder, and to literally everybody else down that demand curve. That one guy, gal, group, whatever, is air quotes overpaying. So in other words, if there are 20 people interested in a deal and there is one person who's willing to pay the highest price to the other 19 people, everybody communally goes, wow, that one person overpaid. That is more or less what you're missing, Trent, and everybody listening in is it's not that people are actually overpaying, because the reality is these markets, yeah, and it's not the stock market, but they're surprisingly efficient. Um, to get and when you introduce brokers who want a fee and their fee increases, the more money they get for the sellers, they are helping drive the price up. So again, it's not that people are overpaying. It's that, there's one buyer who is likely the highest bidder or one of the highest bidders. And all there's other things involved besides price. You know, like I said, the one I just bought, most recent acquisition, I was not the highest bidder, right? So people aren't calling me complaining like, wow, you just overpaid everybody, you know, and beat everybody. No, like I outfoxed you. There are other ways to win deals besides price, right? So Trent, it may not be that you're missing anything. Michael and I have a one-on-one mentee right now who found a $1.8 million property. We did the math. It came out to $1 million. You know what I told him? Make the offer. Guess what the counter was? 1.1 to 1.2. Like, are you kidding me right now? Right? And then he sassed these two people. This is probably the only buyer right now, and you're gonna sass them and like get an attitude. Have you been to the property? Like, what? It is wild how these brokers have artificially raised the prices in everybody's mind, right? And so this feeling of like, gosh, how are all these people doing deals, and why are these prices to the moon? Remember, like when you go to the car dealership and MSRP is a suggestion, right? These brokers, they know the market really well, and they're going to price it just a little bit too high, right? They're going to price it just a little bit too high. And as a result, they're going to scare away all the people down that demand curve. And the people who are up towards the top of the demand curve, they're like, it's a little bit too much. Is that negotiable? And the broker's like, of course it is, right? That's the game being played by the brokers. And even if there's not a broker involved, when the phone rings every day from brokers trying to make a fee, Mr. Mom and Pop, they are going to scorch the earth. There is a group right now, I'm not going to say their names, some of you know who it is, that their goal is to literally scorch the earth. They're calling everybody and saying, if you have a unit there that's paying you anything, I don't care what it is, it's worth $100,000 a site. They're going everywhere in the country, and they're saying, do not sell for under 100,000 a site. If you go to sell, you better call me because I have a buyer for you at 100,000 a site. That is happening right now, and it will not stop. So unfortunately, the earth has been scorched, and as a result, it's always going to feel like overpaying, Trent. It's a great question. I'm so glad you brought that out, man. It's always going to feel this way. You just have to remember everybody from Bob and Donna, Giancarlo, Kyle, everybody on and listening in. Each of you are somewhere on that demand curve. Maybe you're the highest bidder, maybe you're the lowest bidder, maybe you're in the middle. But there is a price that you will look at it and go, I can't do it for that price, and I'm willing to walk and be okay with it. Your goal is to understand this asset class and have confidence in your own underwriting and your vision of where the future is going, to have enough confidence to say, this is my highest and best price for this. And if I walk, I am okay with that. And if there's somebody who's air quotes overpaying, I'm not going to complain, because the reality is they're not overpaying. Because the reality is if they close, that is the new fair market price. So again, our natural psychology, y'all, is to go, hey, what's a fair price for this? And I want a fair to unfair price in my favor. And what I'm trying to say by encouraging overpaying isn't to like actually go out and do something stupid. It's to remember to fight and best your own psychology, to up your own game, know the market, know the asset class, be confident in your underwriting, make an offer that you feel like is your true highest and best, and be okay walking away from that. And the most important thing of all is just remember what Warren Buffett said. It's so easy and so simple. You want to buy great businesses for fair prices. It's that simple. Don't get hooked on this idea of a good deal. Don't. By the way, if I look back at the 85 properties that I've bought and counting, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've closed on a deal and been like, wow, this is a great deal. I can't believe I'm buying it for this price. I could probably count on one hand. The majority of my deals I've gone, this is a fair price to like a little bit unfair in the seller's advantage. And I tell sellers that when I cold call them, I'm like, look, I pay at or above, what's a fair price. Like if it's not going to be fair, I want it to be fair in your favor. Why? Because I want this property to be better because I showed up here and I know what I'm doing and I'm going to do things the right way. Not saying you weren't doing a great job before. I'm just saying I think I know where this industry is going and I think I'm going to attack it in a way that you can't or don't want to or doesn't make sense to you anymore. And so I'm going to sell it to you. It's going to be a great deal for you in this moment. Is it going to appreciate in the future? Of course. Of course. But I am confident in who I am and what I can do in this asset. And therefore, now I can go and I can underwrite properly. I can make an offer and I'm happy if somebody else is willing to pay more. And I understand that because, again, it's a demand curve. I may not always be the highest price on the offering. Trent, fantastic question. Michael, thanks for organizing. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully a lot of people got a lot from it.
Guys, it was fantastic having everybody today. Tomorrow we have another webinar with Thomas Castelli. It's actually being hosted on Hall CPA's site, so you can go through our link and just schedule with them. And then after that, the following week, we're actually having a Q&A with Tom about any of your tax questions whatsoever. But tomorrow will be geared more towards the changes that the administration or the current administration is implementing or extending. So definitely join up for that tomorrow, guys. It was fantastic having you all on. Any questions that we didn't answer, just pop into the community. Obviously, the mastermind's a great place for you to ask those questions and have them answered as well. So thanks so much for joining, guys. It was fantastic having you. Have a good rest of your day. See you around.